We also have another kind of consent called explicit consent. And that is, explicit consent is known as direct or express consent. When somebody says or they authorize you to do something. So explicit is using yes, I will do that. It's not the absence of no. And we're going to talk about the enthusiastic yes after when we come back from our commercial. But for now, we're going to just keep it to the different kinds of consent and the importance to have them. So explicit consent really being actively saying yes. It's like active consent where you are given a specific thing that you agree to, but explicit consent is saying yes to whatever it is. Do you agree to these terms? Yes, I do. Active consent is also being given a specific thing to agree to. So do you, like, for example, do you agree to be having your hands tied up for 10 minutes? That's very specific. And then if you agree to that, if it goes over that time, then that is breaching your contract of consent. So you need to get really clear on certain things. If you're not sure if you've been in situations where you've had implied consent happen, or passive consent, which is assumed consent unless stated otherwise, where somebody could be having sex with you, and unless you say get away, or you say something specific to their brain that they think is the correct word. So no is usually quite a clear indication of no, this is no. And you could say it aggressively, you could say it hyper enthusiastically. No, doesn't really matter, because if the person has assumed that you're consenting, they might think that you're playing a game, right? So we know the old saying of no means no. Well, no actually does mean no. And in some cases, it's getting to be to the point where you need to actually hear a yes, because there are some very unclear lines going on and some very unclear communication going on in the world right now, especially around sex and consent. Now, there is a whole other category of consent called consensual non-consent, which is in the kink zone. And so in the kink world, CNC, consensual non-consent, is a form of role play that two or more people engage in that emulates some form of forced activity. So consensual non-consent could be the kink of playing rape. And as long as both people who are actively doing this have their safe word in place, they've agreed to this, consensual non-consent is in place, they might even have a contract drawn up, that is different than being coerced or forced, because it is a consent to the act of non-consent. So know that this can get confusing. That's why I really wanted to get clear on, how do you know if somebody's consenting? Well, we're going to find out in the next segment. How do you know if somebody's actually consenting? We're going to look at what consent actually looks like. And then enthusiastic yes, what does it look like? And what do we need to have in place? So you're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network.